Hello, and welcome to From the EBPL Archives, Encore presentations from the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hosick. This event was presented as part of our Just for the Health of It initiative. Just for the Health of It is a proprietary health literacy program developed by the East Brunswick Public Library to promote health literacy in Middlesex County. To learn more, visit justforthehealthofit.org. Now, enjoy the program.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for Financial Freedom, Building Wealth to Live the Life You Love. My name is Kathy Chern, and I'm a consumer health librarian at East Brunswick Public Library. Today's program is brought to you by the library's Just for the Health of It initiative to promote community health and wellness. Our speaker today is Bradley Basker, financial advisor at Morgan Stanley in Boston. Bradley works with clients to help build a sustainable financial plan to achieve their financial and life goals and manage their assets for them. He is licensed in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Florida, and Texas. Bradley has already delivered free webinars focused on financial wellness and literacy to companies, synagogues, schools, alumni networks, and public libraries, and enjoys giving back to his communities in this way. Please be aware that this talk is being recorded. Please keep your microphones muted and your webcams off. The recording will be available at ebpl.org/YouTube. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. The speaker will answer questions at the end of the talk. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Bradley.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you everyone for being here today. I know it's probably been a long week for many. There's a lot going on in this country, as you all know, but I appreciate you being here and prioritizing financial wellness given everything that's going on. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Bradley Basker. I'm a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley in Boston, but as she said, I am licensed in New Jersey, and so I have been reaching out to different communities just to continue to spread the value of financial wellness in a time that people need it most. And so today we're going to talk about some key issues associated with establishing an independent financial life and mapping out your financial future. The reality is each of you is unique and different people will have different needs at different times. So we're going to cover a pretty wide range of topics and not go too deeply into any one in particular. Some of these topics might be relevant for you. Some may not be, depending on kind of what stage you are in life, but hopefully you have a couple tidbits you can take out of this. And if you want to explore any of these areas in further detail and dive deeper or take a closer look at how they might impact your specific situation, we can either discuss that in the Q&A later, or you can reach out to me offline and we can chat one-on-one. Now, you may be taking a different path through life than the generations that came before you. Especially if you're a little bit on the younger side, you grew up with technology and the internet, and many of you experienced 9/11 and two economic and market downturns during your formative or early professional years. Many of you may be dealing with unprecedented amounts of student debt or waiting longer to get married, because in today's sharing economy, you may have chosen not to buy a car, or you may consider the flexibility of renting rather than buying a home, especially because your cost of living is higher than it was for your parents. There's no doubt about that. Things are just more expensive than they ever were and even more unaffordable. And all of this may contribute to delay you in reaching sort of that traditional life milestones that typically trigger thoughts of financial planning and sort of independence and financial freedom. So instead, you might be focused on achieving financial wellness. Of course, each of us have our own definitions of financial wellness. And so in general, I think we could all agree that financial wellness means being stress-free and achieving financial stability. On this slide, you can see that full-time employees define financial wellness according to a recent survey by PwC, my former employer. More specifically, 38% of millennials said not being stressed about their finances was the most important aspect of financial wellness. Others said being debt-free. As you can see, other options were available, but by far, number one, not being stressed about finances was the biggest contributor to sort of establishing financial wellness. And so your perspective on finances may be different than your parents, and the financial strategies that work for your parents may not work for you. I'm sure, many of you have parents along the way that said, this is how we did it, this is how you should do it, and perhaps you wanted to carve out a different path, and that's totally okay. But the foundational aspects of mapping out your financial future are the same today as they were for your parents. And that sort of corresponds to planning, budgeting, saving, investing, and building good credit. And we'll talk about each of those in more detail. So how are you and your peers doing when it comes to financial matters? Overall, more millennials are saving with retirement as their top priority for saving. So that's a great thing. In fact, 24% of millennials say they have savings of $100,000 or more. So that's a nice number. That seems healthy, but we're only talking about 24%. So yes, that number is going up between 2018 to 2020. So I like the trajectory that we're going on, but that's only 24%. So what about the remaining 76%? How can we kind of get them to have a little bit more of a cushion? And so no matter how you stack up in your money habits, the fact that you're here today is a great step in the right direction. So today we're going to discuss some of the issues you might be thinking about as you get ready to move out of your parents' house, perhaps, establish your financial freedom. Some of you might be a little bit later in life where that's not as relevant. But the point is no matter what stage you are, there's always an opportunity to sort of get a little bit more financially independent and have a little bit more of a cushion and comfort knowing that you're all set. So we're going to focus on 3 key stages of our financial life: planning, creating wealth, and gaining leverage. First, we'll take a look at initial planning, things like defining your goals, not just specific financial objectives, but deciding what kind of future you really want for yourself. And then we'll also talk about creating a budget so that you can begin to look at your financial life in a deliberate and purposeful way, rather than sort of just cruising through it and thinking you'll figure it out when the time comes. Next, we'll talk about savings and investment strategies that will help you accumulate wealth over time, including things like the importance of saving and some strategies and accounts that will help you save successfully, and the basics of investing, including formulating an investment strategy with a focus on asset allocation. Then third, we'll discuss how you can increase your capacity to borrow and use credit wisely. So we'll talk about establishing credit, which will ultimately give you the financial flexibility to pursue many of your goals. And we'll also talk about some of the basics of finding your first home or buying a home for the first time, whether you decide to buy or rent, and the pros and cons of each. And finally, we'll talk about the value of perhaps working with someone professionally or getting a sort of a plan in place of someone who understands you and can help you gain that financial confidence, look at your full financial picture, and give you kind of the steps you need to get that financial freedom. So let's take a look at how you can plan ahead to make the best choices about your finances so that you can use your wealth and the money that you accumulate to live the life that you envision. First, let's talk about your personal goals. And now you may be wondering, what place do personal life goals have to do in a financial presentation? From my view, this is the only place to start, because at their core, all of the topics that we discuss are really about helping you get what you want out of life. And that can be pretty tough if you haven't given serious thought to the greater life goals that you have. Defining your life goals as specifically as possible will help you establish priorities. And once you have priorities, you can start thinking about what kinds of trade-offs you're willing to make to achieve the version of success on your own terms. Do you want to buy a house or pay your way through medical school, donate to a charity that's important to you, or set foot on all 7 continents? These are all achievable goals, but unless you have substantial wealth at your disposal, you may have to focus on 1 or 2 first. So it's a great idea to be ambitious and aspirational and think about all the things you want to accomplish, but realistically, it's important to have priorities. Think about, okay, this is a must-have, this is a nice-to-have when you think about your goals. And while you're making those decisions, you're going to want to think about what your life path should look like. At some point, you may have to choose one goal over another, right? Is it worth delaying home ownership to finance a trip to Antarctica, right? That's something that only you can decide, and only if you've really given thought to what's important to you. And once you understand what you want, then you can start using the available tools to get there. So let's try a little exercise. We're going to sort of look at an example, and I want you all to think kind of internally as I'm going through this, what are your kind of short, medium, and long-term goals? And so we've got this couple here, Sarah and Michael. Sarah just finished law school and found a job as an associate, and Michael has a job in sales. They recently got engaged, and Sarah has just moved into Michael's small 1-bedroom apartment. Let's give them some arbitrary goals. Their short-term goals over the next year or 2 are they want to help pay the cost of their wedding and their honeymoon. They want to buy or lease a reliable car to get rid of Michael's old junky car. And they want to support the local food bank. Their intermediate goals, which I like to define as 3 to 5 years, include moving to a larger rental or maybe buying a home of their own, starting a family, and making a dent in their student loans. And then their long-term goals really are anything past 5 years, can be all the way 20, 30, 40 years from now, are things like starting their own business, getting their kids through college with minimal debt, and supporting a comfortable retirement. Now, all of these things are important to Michael and Sarah, but let's make some decisions about what is most important to them. So let's say their number 1 short-term goal is paying for their wedding. The top intermediate goal is starting a family, followed closely by getting a larger space for that family. and their top long-term goal is to retire comfortably, and so that they can retire sort of off of that business that they're trying to start. So to do this well, you kind of have to do soul searching and have some discussions with your partner if you have one. And I'm not going to put any of you on the spot here. Obviously, if we were in person, perhaps I'd ask you for some ideas of what your goals are. But that said, make sure you think about what are your short, medium, long-term goals, because when you start with the goals in mind and then track backwards, you're going to be on a path towards financial success as opposed to sort of just figuring it out as you go and not having a plan. Now, the next thing is it's going to be hard to achieve those longer-term financial goals if you're never able to actually save a few dollars to open an account or invest. And so that leaves us to the second stage of mapping out your path to financial freedom, setting a budget. And while living on a budget might sound like it limits your options, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to feel like it's a burden, because the process of setting a budget requires you to set priorities. So a budget is actually a valuable tool for helping you get the things you really want by showing you what it'll take to get them. And perhaps you'll realize that the things that you think you want actually don't really need if it means that you could have something bigger in the future. So we're going to talk about the different steps to setting a budget. Again, for some of you, this might seem too arduous and too cumbersome, but I really would recommend, even at a very simplistic level, to kind of do something like this. So the first step is to calculate your total income. Add up all the income you receive on a regular basis from all sources on a pre-tax basis. In addition to your salary and bonus, this could include regular gifts, investment income, freelance income, and the like. So you want to figure out, what am I bringing in every month? Then the next step, step 2, is to track your current expenses. Write down everything you spent and what you spent it on for a 3-month period. Use bank statements, bank records, credit card statements, etc. And add a third column with the total amount of money you saved over that tracking period. So you can have column 1 would be what you brought in, column 2 will be what you spent. Then you can kind of see what you're potentially able to put away. Now you might be thinking, why not just look at 1 month? Well, the reality is every month you might have some aberrations or some outliers. Perhaps if you looked at December, you might find that your credit card statement is a little bit bigger because you were buying Christmas or Hanukkah presents. So I like to say 3 months, average it out, all right, as a way to kind of standardize what the expenses are on a month-to-month basis. And then we move into step 3, which I think is so important, right? Separate needs and wants in the context of your overall goals and objectives. So divide all of these expenses into reasonably broad categories. So things like, clothing, rent, groceries, etc. So needs are fixed expenses over which you have very little control. So health insurance, income taxes, rent, things that you absolutely essentially need to have. Wants are discretionary expenses which you have great control over. So things like entertainment, dining out, leisure travel. So certain categories like food and clothing are likely to have both needs and wants within them. So divide the expense and assign a reasonable portion to each column, right? So the groceries you have to make your lunch and your dinner every day, that's kind of food that you need to have. Going out and getting that Starbucks latte or eating out every single day at lunch, in the corporate cafeteria, perhaps that's something that's more of a want. You don't need to do that. You could pack your own lunch. And considering the needs and wants in context of your overall goals will help you kind of prioritize what perhaps you could cut back on. Then step 4 is setting your budget. So if you're lucky, your expenses will fall short of what your income is, right? With enough left over to support your longer term savings needs. And if not, you need to make adjustments. So start with the needs column and determine whether those needs can be met for less money. Can you find cheaper car insurance? Can you, think about getting a roommate perhaps so that you don't have to pay, for a 1-bedroom. Instead, with 2 people, it would be a lower cost. Then determine sort of your priorities when it comes to discretionary spending. Would you trade out dining less often for keeping more of your summer beach share or something like that? And replace the spending numbers with target numbers reflecting your new priorities. So again, do a little bit of a snapshot, see where you are today, then look ahead and see what could this look like if I were to cut back on some of these areas. And then finally, the last one that's extremely important is to sort of stick with the plan and monitor your results and adjust if necessary. So track your actual expenses against the budget that you've set for yourself and try to stay within those targets, but also use the first few months to monitor those results and reconsider the priorities that you set. Perhaps restaurants you realize are more important to you, and when you cut back on that, you weren't enjoying life as much. Okay, so you go out dining a little bit more than you expected. Now maybe you cut back on buying that PlayStation 5 or those new pair of sneakers that you would have otherwise been able to spend at the restaurants. And so as your financial circumstances change or priorities change, feel free to adjust the budget. You don't want to make a budget and have it be stale and obsolete because things have changed. If you bring in more money, if perhaps you have a child or an additional child and the expenses go up, that's going to adjust what your monthly expenses are, perhaps what your income is, and so you need to adjust accordingly. Now, you've all heard the saying that it takes money to make money, right? And to me, that means you need to save money if you want to create long-term wealth. And so now that we've set a budget that'll allow us to save a little bit of money, let's take a look into successful saving. And we'll talk about why it's important to save at every point in your life, strategies that'll make saving easier, why saving a little bit now is better than saving a whole lot later, and what kinds of accounts you'll need to establish to manage different parts of your financial life. So to put things in perspective, here's some interesting statistics from recent research on financial wellness conducted by PwC. Only 35% of millennials employed full-time are confident that they'll be able to retire when they would like to. Only 35%, a third. Two-thirds of people aren't sure they'll be able to retire when they want to. Just over half said they have less than $1,000 saved to deal with unexpected expenses, right? That rainy day fund. And over 60% said that insufficient emergency savings was one of their top financial concerns. So let's cut to the chase. If you want to achieve and protect your financial freedom now and into the future, it's important to develop the habit of saving early, automatically, and often. So here's some ways that you can put some extra money towards your savings. The first one is pay yourself first. That means transferring a portion of your salary to your savings first before you start to take care of other optional or discretionary expenses or those wants that I mentioned. Strategies like participating in your company's 401k or 403b or 457, or putting money away towards a health savings plan, something like that where before it even hits your account, your checking account, where you can make mistakes and spend it in a bad way, you have the ability to sort of put that money away, set it and forget it, and it'll be there when the time comes. The next one is to trim your spending by changing your habits. We all have regular habits like buying a morning latte or going out for lunch every day, and we could cut back on perhaps some of those. Maybe you dine out 3 times for lunch a week instead of 5, and that'll slowly start to add up because you'll find that a few dollars here and there really can compound on itself over time. Another one is taking advantage of tax benefits. There are a number of ways you may be able to increase the amount of tax you give back to Uncle Sam through personal and retirement savings. And there's a little bit more nuance to it. And when you start to talk about how to minimize taxes, it's its own seminar by itself. But there are ways to kind of save money on taxes. If you're trying to save up for college, perhaps for your kids, there's a 529 plan, which shelters the gains on your investments, and you don't have to pay taxes on them like you would in a regular account. Coming up next month, we actually have a seminar on 529 plans through this library. And then finally, you can use one of your most important assets, time, to leverage the power of compound interest and saving earlier in life and taking advantage of what we call interest on interest, right? The fact that it grows and it continues to grow on itself and it compounds and accelerates over time. And we're going to look at an example coming up now. So let's take a look a little bit more at compound interest. And Albert Einstein once called compound interest the 8th wonder of the world. And here's an example of what he meant. So in this example, we have Jane and John at the same age, and both saved $87,500 over a 25-year period, $3,500 a year for 25 years. Except Jane, the early saver, started saving at 25 years old, while John, the late saver, started saving at age 40. And so even though they saved the exact same amount over the exact same number of years, you'll notice that by the age of 65, Jane has substantially more savings than John, almost $600,000 more. And this is because Jane gave her savings significantly more time to grow, and she was able to take greater advantage of the power of compounded interest. So note that this scenario assumes about an 8% average return on the investment to illustrate the point. Obviously, if the return in the market was a little bit higher, the disparity would be greater. If the return in the market was even lower, then the disparity would be smaller. Now, keep in mind, again, you have to actually invest in the market to kind of see this type of return. If you were to invest in savings, in the savings environment we have now, where interest rates are less than 1%, you wouldn't go from $87,500 in 25 years to $800,000. That obviously wouldn't happen. The point is you have to take on a little bit of risk to kind of get there. But what we're trying to illustrate is that, the earlier you save, the greater the impact it'll have on your savings, and you'll have that money sort of ready for you in the longer term. And if you haven't started saving already, it's never too late, because as these numbers demonstrate, the earlier you start saving, the better off you'll be. Now that we know that we're aiming for and the importance of saving, let's start building a financial infrastructure to manage your day-to-day expenses while working towards some of those larger long-term goals. And so there are 3 types of accounts you will most likely need. The first one is a cash management account. And the purpose of it is to sort of pay your regular expenses, get access to your cash, and receive payments from your employer and the like. This used to mean opening a checking account at a local bank branch, and that's still a choice, but there are now so many more options because as payments become increasingly electronic, you might find that the physical location is less important. In fact, I have clients that do all of their cash management through our active assets account at Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley doesn't have a brick and mortar bank, so to speak, but we waive all ATM fees and we have the ability to do everything electronically working with our digital portal. And as a rule, you typically want to have 1 to 2 months of expenses on hand in these checking accounts or slightly more if needed to meet account minimums. And consider setting up overdraft protection to eliminate, bounced check fees. Perhaps you spend more money than you realized you had. You didn't sort of coordinate. Now you kind of dip. So there's certain things that you can do to make sure that if you were to overdraft beyond the balance, you could kind of pull from a different account. Now, the next thing you want to do is set up a savings account. A savings account, I like to think of as almost like an emergency fund. And some might opt to kind of just keep more money in a money market account or a savings account. But others you sort of tend to have just a standard savings account earning a little bit more than what you get in a checking account. I looked at some of the savings rates the other day. Right now, it's like 0.4% annually. It's really, really low because of the interest rate environment that we're in. But I like to say you typically want to have 3 to 6 months worth of expenses on hand to cover a potential loss of income. Maybe you lose your job or large unexpected expenses. Perhaps you have a loved one who is sick and you need to take care of them, or there's just certain things that you want to be able to plan for. I call it the rainy day fund. I like to say 3 to 6 months. Why is it such a big range? Well, I say if you're someone that perhaps family you could lean on if you lost your job and you can maybe move out and no longer have to pay rent and live at your parents or something like that, then maybe you don't need to have as much as 6 months worth of expenses. If you're someone that is kind of on their own and needs to kind of have that protection, then maybe you want to be closer to 6 months worth of expenses. Now, the final thing, once you've kind of done that, you've got 1 to 2 months worth in checking, you've got 3 to 6 months in a savings account, everything else, in my opinion, should be in your investment account. That doesn't mean investing in risky everything. It just means investing it so you can get a little bit more of a return on your dollar. And so what you want to do is you want to set up a 401k for retirement. We all know that if you work at more of a public company, that would be something like a 403b or a 457. But once you've got your 401k, you've put away money pre-tax, you want to start to invest in the market in a brokerage account. That could be in mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, right? That's what people typically work with Morgan Stanley to do, is kind of build portfolios for them to invest their money and get that 8 to 10% annual return that has historically been the case for the last 100 years or so. And so, again, it's important to understand a lot of people are sitting with a lot of money in their savings account, earning very, very, very little return on their money, when the reality is you can keep money on the sidelines in a savings account for that cushion and let the rest of it go to work for you, knowing that if it's well diversified, you're not going to go down from, let's say, $100,000 in an account to zero overnight. Yes, the market might dip here or there, but you're diversified. You haven't put all your chips in one basket. And so far, it might dip a little bit, but in the long haul, it's probably going to go up. So let's talk about a few issues that apply to you if you're starting out as a couple, or perhaps if you're on your own. And for some of you that have been married for 20, 30, 40 years, this might be a moot point for you. But for some of these younger folks on the call, I do want to talk about the decision of, do I want to make separate accounts or have joint accounts? So again, if we were in the room right now, I'd ask people to raise their hands and say, do you have your own accounts, or do you have everything together with your partner or your spouse? And so here's the pros and cons of having separate accounts versus joint accounts. So for separate accounts, on the upside, many people find that having their own bank account gives them a greater sense of independence, right? You can spend money as you see fit without having to coordinate with your partner. And some find that separate accounts also support a more romantic relationship, allowing you to buy gifts and take each other out on dates with your own money. You sort of don't have to spoil the surprise if someone looks at their account and sees that there's been a big purchase from somewhere, and you can kind of look at it as like, that is kind of my money to use as I choose. On the other hand, separate accounts might be less convenient for paying joint expenses like the rent bill, right? Some couples find it awkward to keep a running tally of who owes what. And there might even be conflict over what constitutes a joint expense and what doesn't. What if one person thinks, we don't need to buy this new TV and the other person does? Well, now what? And so the point is with the separate accounts, it gets kind of complicated about who's going to pay what. Now, on the upside of a joint account is that common expenses like mortgages, childcare costs, when they begin to eclipse individual expenses, joint accounts might simplify household finances. And so if only one partner works outside the home, it might also make the stay-at-home partner feel more integrated in the family's finances. On the downside, full visibility into your partner's spending might not always be desirable. Perhaps, again, like I said, you spoil the surprise when someone buys a gift, or it might lead to more scrutiny, right? All it takes is the person who's reviewing the credit card statements might say, why did you spend money on this, this, and that? And that could create some conflict, right? So the point is there's no right way to do this. I'll tell you how I do with my wife. We talked about this a couple of years ago, and we've been sticking to it. We have what we call our pillar account. That's where all the direct deposits go. We pay all of our common expenses, our mortgage, our rent, groceries, child costs, etc. And then what we said is we're going to put 1% of what we bring in every month into our own discretionary bank account. It's a separate account. I have my own. She has her own. And we get to spend that however we want. My wife doesn't have visibility to that account. I don't have visibility into her discretionary account. If I want to go, to a Red Sox game or a Yankees game, I can do that with my friends. She can go shopping, and I don't get to call her out for anything like that. So that's a healthy thing that I think many couples could do, and I'd be interested to hear if that has worked for you out there. So now that we've saved a little bit of money to work with, let's turn our attention to sort of those longer-term wealth goals and the investment strategies you'll likely need to address them. Now, this can be a very broad and complex topic, so today we're only going to cover the very, very basics. We'll take a look at how your goals and your preferences become the key inputs into a disciplined investment planning process, and then we'll discuss how those inputs become an asset allocation, how you figure out where those dollars are going to go when it comes to investing, which is at the heart of an investment strategy. So Morgan Stanley has a philosophy of a 4-part goals planning system process. And again, whether you work with Morgan Stanley or not, this is a process that anyone can integrate into their life. So the first step is discover, where you kind of have a conversation, whether it's with yourself, your partner, an advisor, and kind of uncover what are your goals and understand your entire financial picture. Because before you can put a plan in place to remedy that and get yourself on track, you kind of have to figure out where are we today and where are we trying to go. And then you want to think about, okay, once you've got that squared away, you want to assess the various scenarios and advise yourself on kind of what the appropriate strategies would be to meet those goals. Think about the different options that you have and then put sort of the cost and the pros and cons together. Then you want to actually execute. Pick a couple strategies, explore the different accounts that might be available and products that might be available to identify the right combination to meet those spending needs and invest in a tax-efficient manner. And then finally, in a similar way as we would do with any budget, you want to make sure you track your progress. And so by following your financial roadmap, you have to have vigilance and flexibility and adapt and monitor those progress in real time so that you make adjustments that, adjust to your needs, life events, and changing market conditions. So again, we put plans in place for clients, but those plans change. That doesn't mean we totally abandon them altogether, but the point is you want to be prepared and be sort of adaptable as things change in your life. So when you think about sort of an investment strategy, and again, this is something that perhaps you can do on your own if you've got a little bit of investment experience or you work with someone to do this with you, you kind of have to think about what are the inputs to making that strategy, and then kind of what would those outputs look like. And so first, we want to start by putting some target numbers to your goals. And that can be setting a lump sum figure, say the money of a down payment on a house, or the stream of ongoing income, or the amount of money you're going to need to support your retirement. So you kind of want to think about, what am I trying to get to? What is my target? Then not all long-term goals have the same time frame. So the next step is to determine when you're going to need the money. If you need money in 5 years for a down payment, you need money in 20 years to put your kids through college, and you need money in 30 years for retirement, you're going to invest those dollars a little bit differently once you figure out what the time horizon is. And then finally, you need to understand your own comfort with risk. Are you going to be up all night worrying about the stock market if it has a bad day, it's been up a little bit, down a little bit, or can you live with a little bit more volatility in hopes of higher long-term returns? Remember, more risk, more reward. Less risk, less reward. And so I can't ever tell someone what they should feel when it comes to a risk tolerance, but I can tell you, if you're someone that's in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and you're not planning on retiring until your 60s, you've got a little bit more time to sort of deal with the ups and downs of your investment. If perhaps you're already in retirement, you don't have as much of a runway to deal with the ups and downs, and so perhaps you'll be a little bit more conservative and trade off the fact that you're giving up a little bit more of that upside. And so once you do that, you can create an asset allocation strategy to adjust to those goals. And so what is asset allocation? It's just a given mix of different asset classes like stocks, bonds, cash, alternative investments. And so it can include things like real estate, commodities, hedge funds, and basically anything else that has recognized value would be considered as part of your asset allocation. And so why would you want to include different types of assets? Why not just do all stocks, or all bonds or all cash? Because different asset classes tend to behave differently under different market conditions. Cash in the bank will do better than stocks in a down market. Cash isn't decreasing in value, but stocks will outperform in an up market. So ever since March and April, stocks have been killing it. I mean, the market's been up 50% since March. If you had that money sitting in cash earning your 0.01%, you've probably missed out on a lot. So the point is in a down market, some investments do better. In an up market, other investments do better. And so there's different sectors that perform differently in different environments. And so the point is you want to create a strategy that diversifies across multiple sectors, multiple geographies, multiple types of asset classes, so that you're not putting too many eggs in one basket. So let's go back to Sarah and Michael, our couple from earlier, and let's talk about kind of what their allocation would look like depending on their different goals. And remember, they had short, medium, and long-term goals. So to keep it simple, let's focus on one of the long-term goals and one in the medium-term range. Each of these has a different time horizon, a bit shorter for buying the house and a bit longer on retirement. So let's say they are fairly comfortable with the value of their portfolio rising and falling in the short term in pursuit of their longer-term goals. So overall, if you think about their whole portfolio, their overall allocation might look something like this on the slide on the left. So you can see they're about 75% in stocks, maybe about an eighth in bonds, and the rest in cash and what's called a real estate investment trust. But if we dive deeper into the actual goals and the portfolios that we build for each of those goals, you can see for the house is only, let's say 3 to 5 years away. They're more a third in the stocks, a third in bonds, a third in cash. They don't want to necessarily deal with another pandemic or recession, the market drops, and they don't have enough money for the down payment. Whereas on the other hand, look at their retirement, which is now 30, 40 years away from now. They've pretty much got, maybe 90% in different kinds of stocks. We've got an S&P, we've got small cap stocks, international companies, but you don't have any sign of cash. You have very small percentage in bonds, and that's because they can take on more risk with the ups and downs. And so that's what you kind of want to do for yourself, is think about what those goals are, think about the time horizon, think about your tolerance to accept risk, and that's how you're going to develop an asset allocation strategy. Now, so far we've talked about how to set goals, save money, and invest it for the long term. Now we're going to turn our attention to how people can use other people's money to reach your goals. So we're going to talk about improving your ability to borrow or your credit score. And as we'll see, lenders are only one of the groups that you might find will want to know about your credit worthiness. So some people aren't really familiar with what their credit score is. Some people don't even know what their own credit score is, and that's something that I'd recommend, looking into, and we'll talk more about that. So your credit score is a way for anyone to assess the level of financial risk associated with giving you a loan or conducting any sort of business with you. When you go to rent an apartment, the landlord will conduct a credit check to assess your suitability as a tenant. When you try to get a cell phone, the cell phone company will do the same. The bottom line is your credit score will impact most areas of your financial life. For those of you that have had to get a mortgage, credit score is a big indicator of what kind of interest rate you're going to get. If you're someone that has a risk of defaulting on your payments, there's a good chance you're going to have to pay a higher interest rate to compensate the bank that's giving you that loan. If you've got a good credit score, they know that you're unlikely to default or less likely, and they'll give you more favorable terms. So there are three main suppliers of credit scores: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and actually a number of scoring systems, but the most commonly referred to one is the FICO score, which is introduced by Fair Isaac and Company. And I won't ask you to shout it out. Obviously, we're doing this virtually, but I want you to think about whether you know your FICO score. And if you don't, I would really recommend going into one of your bank accounts. At this point, pretty much every bank kind of will give it to you for free in the system. And you want to look at this slide and see, where am I? And if you can get, I would say above 740, 760, you're in really good shape. If you're below that, you kind of want to look into what is causing it to be lower. And so let's talk about kind of what is your FICO score made up of. The first and the biggest, 35%, is your payments history. Do you pay on time? Do you pay in full? Are you someone that's reliable when it comes to paying things back with regards to loans and credit cards? The next one is amounts owed. So if you've got a huge outstanding credit card balance, that's going to hurt your credit score, because essentially they're saying there's a chance that you're not going to be able to pay all of it off. One of those loans, one of those payments might fall by the wayside. So that's the next contributing factor. And then the other ones are length of credit history. So the younger you are, it's perhaps harder to have a longer credit history. You don't have a track record for a long period of time. That's going to contribute. The longer you've been paying your bills on time, the likelier you are going to have sort of a better credit score. And then the other two are kind of types of credit used and new credit, right? And a lot of people ask me, I don't have this on this slide, but is there any damage to your credit score when you open and close credit cards? I've heard anecdotally that if you close credit cards consistently, that's a red flag. You know, a lot of people open credit cards just for their opening bonuses and their promotions. I would just say err on the side of caution and don't get too many credit cards and close them just because you get that opening promo deal. So we all want the best credit scores that we can get, and here are 3 things you can do to improve yours. The first one is paying your bills on time. The next one is borrowing, but not too much. You might think that, you know, using a credit card is so easy and it's not something you ever have to really worry about because it's just you swipe the card and it's done. But if you overextend yourself and you don't actually have the balance to pay it off, look at ways to cut back on that and not perhaps be so impulsive or make decisions with your credit card that you regret, right? Back in the day, before credit cards, you had to hand over a wad of cash to pay for something. Nowadays, it's so easy to just sort of blindly spend on things because it just is a swipe of a credit card and you'll deal with it later, all right? And the last thing I'll say is monitor your credit reports. If you don't know what your credit score is, take a look. If you've seen a dip one month to another, look into why that is. My wife the other day, she's got a really good credit score. I think it's like 790. And all of a sudden her credit score went down to 740 and she looked into it. And it turns out there was a mistake made by one of the reporting agencies that said she hadn't paid a certain bill. She demonstrated that she had paid it off. They updated it. It's back up to 790. So the point is monitor that because it can take time to adjust. And you don't want to sort of be in a position where you have to, you know, scramble because you're getting a low credit score and therefore getting a higher interest rate. Now, if you're moving out on your own, if you're still living with your parents, perhaps you're renting right now, you're going to need some place to move to at some point. You'd like to buy a home. And so we're going to discuss the merits of renting versus buying and discuss some of the steps you'll need to take regardless of which you decide to do. And again, I realize we've got some people here that are perhaps past the stage in life. Hopefully you can bear with us for these couple slides. So with the high cost of housing, a lot more of those in our sort of the millennial generation are staying home longer when they do move out, it's more likely to be with a roommate than a spouse. And that may well be a function of people getting married later and a broader acceptance of partners living together before getting married. Childcare costs and student loan debt are factors as well. So you can kind of see the homeownership rate of people sort of under 35 years old is only about a third. It's becoming really, really hard to buy. And as you can see, as you get older in life, many more people are owning. And that makes sense. You've sort of accumulated wealth. We'd like to get to the point where more people can buy at a young age, because when you rent a home, that money is going to your landlord and you're never seeing it again. Whereas when you buy a home and you're paying into a mortgage, you're establishing equity and building that value. And so some of the pros and cons of renting versus buying, I typically, sometimes when I do these seminars, I'll bring in a real estate agent to talk about this. But the reality is, you know, when compared to buying a home, the initial costs of renting are much lower. Obviously, you don't have to put a down payment, right? You probably have some refundable security deposit and perhaps some sort of rental agent fee, but it's a much smaller amount of money than it would be for a down payment. All right, if you want more space or perhaps you don't like your neighborhood or you get a better job in another town, you can just up and leave at the end of your lease and rent a new place. Right? Housing markets can go down as well as up, and so your landlord bears that risk. You don't really have any risk when it comes to renting. As well, when you rent, obviously the landlord has to deal with the repair and maintenance. You don't have to deal with any of that. So your costs are really limited to just paying your utilities and paying your rent. Now, on the other hand, owning a home, you've got a lot of benefits. And I really would implore you, for those of you that are renting, to look into kind of the benefits of buying a place if you can afford it and start to think about that goal. Right? The first thing is, by owning a home, there is the potential opportunity for price appreciation. And that means that the value of your home might increase over time. Of course, it also might decrease in value for those of you that perhaps tried to sell their home in 2008, 2009, when we had the housing crisis. That obviously was a bad time to be a homeowner. But the point is in general, over time, real estate has typically gone up for a long swath of time. Now, as well, in addition to the potential for the value of your home to increase, another financial advantage of your home ownership is the potential of building equity. You build more and more equity or ownership in your home with each mortgage payment, right? As you continue to get more and more of that principal and interest paid down, you are closer and closer to truly owning that home. Because the reality is, the bank in a way owns the home, because if you default on those payments, they'll foreclose on the home, all right? And there are also some tax advantages that I want to talk about. Whether this will continue in the future, who knows? But for now, you can deduct up to a certain amount of money in mortgage interest. So that kind of corresponds to some of the payments you're making in your mortgage with the principal and interest. You can actually deduct, and that ends up being a lot of money, especially in the beginning of a mortgage when more of your payments are interest. And over time, it becomes more principal payment. Now, when you're starting to think about buying a home, you really want to establish kind of the dream team, as I like to call it, your real estate agent, a real estate attorney, and a mortgage banker. So the first thing is getting that real estate agent. Then you're going to have the real estate attorney who's going to be more involved with the actual paperwork once you move forward. And then the mortgage banker is the one that's actually going to give you the mortgage, unless you're someone that has all the cash on hand to pay for it. So the first thing is talk to a real estate agent, get that person that you're going to kind of give the mandate to work with, hire that attorney, get a pre-approval for a mortgage, and then obviously they'll run your credit report. Once you have all that, then you're going to kind of want to come up with a list of needs and wants. So needs might be, I want to be in a neighborhood that has low crime. I want to be in a place that has a nice backyard, and I want to be somewhere on a quiet street. A want might be, I want to have a fire pit. A want might be, I want to have a basketball court in the driveway, right? You can kind of start to tier those priorities, and that'll help you and your agent start to identify which homes might make sense for you to buy. Then set yourself a time frame. I'm not saying you should be rushed with this decision. When I bought a condo for the first time, it took me 6 months before I found a place that I really fell in love with. But you want to give yourself kind of a target time frame of how long do you think this is going to take? How long can you stomach this taking? Because you might get in a position where if you said this is going to take me a month and now a month goes and you haven't won any of the bids on the places you like, you might start to get frustrated and make a decision that you don't like. But if you give yourself a fair amount of time, perhaps you won't make an irrational decision and put a bid down on a place that you don't really like. And then finally, right, once you start to see lots of places, you're going to, hopefully at this point know what good value is. You'll have a sense of what you can afford versus what the value are in the different places you're looking. Then you'll put in a bid, right? Hopefully that bid gets accepted. You might have some setbacks where perhaps inspection doesn't go through. You realize that the home has some issues. The homeowner needs to fix it. You have to wait a little bit more time. You might be in a situation where you fall in love with the place and actually you end up losing the bid. Oftentimes a place that's so great, other people are going to want to buy it as well. So that's all just part of the process. But the point is use your team, have that real estate agent, the mortgage banker, work with them to kind of make the best decision, get the best rates, and then you become a homeowner. And so why is homeownership so important? And again, I actually haven't updated this slide for 2021 yet, but the reality is we've never been in such a low interest rate environment. There's never been a better time, at least for years, that interest rates have been so low. And so the slide here really just demonstrates if you can get a mortgage on $1 million home, and again, this is just for an example, right? If you think about what the interest rates are now on a mortgage, you think about what you'd be saving in monthly payments, you can really save a lot of money. And over time, year over year, when you lock in that sort of 30-year fixed rate, if that's what you decide to get, that can really contribute to very, very significant interest savings. And so now is a good time, if ever, to look into buying a home or perhaps buying a second home if you're looking for one, because rates are so low. But they may not continue as the economy continues to open up. There is indications that those interest rates might start to creep up, and you might look back and say, man, I really wish I had pulled the trigger. And so what I've been sharing today is all about financial freedom and achieving it for yourself. And it's been said that most people only remember 3 things from any presentation, and I've thrown a lot of information at you today. So here are the 3 big takeaways I'd like you to have. The first one is set clear goals for yourself. It's much easier to develop a strategy when you know what you want to accomplish, and whatever your view of a successful life is, work towards that with purpose. The second one is save, save, save. Start early and set up your budget so you can make regular contributions towards your long-term goals. And to make this process easier, just try to set up something automatic in terms of automatic transfers to a savings account or an investment account or to your 401k. Enroll in those plans that are available to you by your employer. And so you can set aside those funds for long-term goals and not be in a position where you look back and say, sort of that demon on my shoulder said, I should have done this, and you regret it in the future. And then finally, the third takeaway is to carefully improve and protect your credit score. Being able to demonstrate that you are a good credit risk will make it easier to borrow, save you money, and help you in many aspects of your financial life. And so today, financial advisors kind of focus more on financial planning and financial education and the lens that looks beyond just your investment portfolio to capture your full financial picture. And those might be very different than the brokers of the past. I know my parents, when they think of financial advisor, they just think of someone that would execute a trade for them. I call them up, hey, I want you to buy, 10 shares of Apple. And that's what a financial advisor did. But now it's all about kind of taking a step back, looking at your financial picture and really establishing what those goals are, what your current financial situation is, and how we're going to get you from A to B. And working with a financial advisor, whether it's me or anyone else, the point is they can help you kind of find answers to the questions that you have about your finances and your financial future. And by looking at your entire financial picture, your investments, your cash flow, your debts, tax planning, insurance, your financial advisor can help you ensure that all elements of your financial life work together to bring you closer to your important goals. If you're not sure how to get started on planning towards achieving your financial freedom, a financial advisor can kind of help you develop a realistic roadmap and be an objective lens to kind of give you that third-party perspective on perhaps what's working and what's not and how we can get you on track. And so I want to thank you all for being here again today. Thank you, Kathy, and the East Brunswick Public Library for having me here for the second time. I'm putting my contact information here. Hopefully, Kathy will send it out as well. Please feel free to take down my phone number as well as my email. You can also just Google my name. You can put time on my calendar by scheduling a meeting on my website if you'd like, if you've got any further questions. And if you've enjoyed our session here today, we do have 2 more coming up next month, thanks to the East Brunswick Library again. These are geared more towards people, parents and grandparents. The first one is Raising Money Savvy Kids, where we talk about strategies for having the money talk with your kids, setting them up for success so that when they get into the real world, they make sort of the right decisions and don't perhaps fall prey to some of the pitfalls that we as parents did in our lifetime. And then coming up 2 weeks later, we have the 529 College Savings Plan. That's where I talk about what I like to call the most underutilized but advantageous tax vehicle for saving for college that many people don't know about and wish they did. We'll talk more about that in late February. And finally, January is Financial Wellness Month in the United States. If you know of an organization, whether it's another library, a synagogue, a church, a company, and you want to just bring me in for a seminar of this kind, I've got a number of topics. I do this completely complimentary, and I just enjoy giving back and spreading sort of financial literacy with, in the era that we're in right now, I think a lot of people could use it. So please feel free to reach out, and we can talk about more of that in detail. And if you'd like to reach out one-on-one as well, please feel free to do that. So I'm going to pass the floor back over to Kathy. I appreciate everyone being here, and hopefully we can get some questions.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Bradley. So if anyone has any questions, you could type them into the chat box. And we have a question that was submitted earlier. It says, I know the maximum amount that can be contributed to an IRA or 401k is $6,000. Is that $6,000 per individual, or is it $6,000 max for a married couple?
Yeah, so retirement saving gets kind of complicated. So I think that whoever asked that question, there's a few things that are being confused. So with an IRA, whether it's a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, the maximum you can put in is $6,000, as the person who asked the question said. Now that is on an individual level, person by person. So one partner can put in $6,000, another partner, your spouse, can also put in $6,000. Even if that other partner does not work, if only one of the partners works, you can have what's called a spousal IRA, and you can still put the $6,000 in. But the 401k has a much higher maximum contribution every year. It's $19,500, and that doesn't include your company's match if there is one. And so you can put a lot more away into your 401k. The IRAs are a little bit more limited in the sense you can only put the $6,000 away, but you absolutely can put it away for yourself, and you can put it away in a separate account for your spouse or your partner. I just want to point out with IRAs, you can't do joint accounts. Same with 401ks. Everything is individual. It's under your social security number. So you'll kind of have your own individual accounts for that. That's not something you can have joint, but you'll obviously probably name your partner as your beneficiary. If God forbid you pass away, they would be able to inherit those funds.
Okay. And then another question. My wife and I currently max out our 401k and 457b respectively. I also max my Roth IRA via backdoor conversion. Is she eligible to have a Roth as well?
Yeah, so she would be. Again, like I said, everything is person dependent. So she could also do a backdoor Roth IRA, and I'm very impressed that whoever asked that question knows about the backdoor approach. There's also something, this is a conversation for another day, but there's something actually called a mega backdoor Roth IRA, which involves putting money in a post-tax 401k and then backdooring that into a Roth IRA. So I don't know who asked that question. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to explain more about that. That might be a way, if you've got more money sitting on the sidelines that you want to save for retirement, you actually could put away up to $37,000 more into a mega backdoor Roth IRA. But to answer your question specifically, your wife can still do the backdoor IRA for herself because of what I talked about. As long as one of the two of you has enough earned income, you can be putting away both. I see John thank you for asking the question.
Okay, so if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box.
And again, for anyone that has a question that's a little bit more nuanced for themselves, or they don't want to ask it to the group, please feel free to reach out to me. Hopefully you grab my number, and Kathy will send out my contact information as well. Or you can just Google my name, Bradley Basker. You'll find it. It should be the first thing that comes up.
Yes, so I will send out the handout and the link to the recording along with ways to contact Bradley in the email. Okay, so we have 2 new questions. One of them is, my IRA account is mixed before and after tax money. How can I separate it?
I'm not sure I understand how that's possible. Whoever asked that question, could they perhaps expand more on that?
Yeah, and then the follow-up to that was, can I convert it to a Roth IRA? Okay,
so I'll very simply say, the traditional IRA is meant to sort of be, it's kind of in a way, it depends how it is. You can put post-tax money in a traditional IRA, and that money has already been taxed in terms of your contribution, but any gains on that investment account is going to be taxed at sort of the income tax rate. If you put money away pre-tax in a traditional IRA, and that's only available to people who don't have access to a 401k or 403b or 457, then everything will be taxable, your contribution and the gains. So what I would say to that person who asked the question is, yes, you absolutely should. If you have money in a traditional IRA and you want that to be sort of tax-free going forward, you can convert it to a Roth IRA. And I know there's a question from Elena about, what's the difference between a regular and a Roth IRA? The idea with a Roth IRA is the money that's going in there has already been taxed, and the gains. So let's say you invest $50,000 over 10 years in a Roth IRA. If that $50,000 with savvy investments grows to $150,000, you don't pay any income tax on that $100,000 gain. Whereas with a traditional IRA, if that money grows, you are going to pay taxes on that gain. And so that's why people convert from traditional to Roth. And again, you can only do $6,000 a year, but that's the benefit, is you don't have to pay taxes on the growth of that Roth IRA account. Even if it grows for 30 years, you'll never have to pay taxes on it unless you take that money out before you're 59 and a half years old. So that's the caveat. It's a retirement account. The IRS will penalize you 10% if you take that money out, and you'll have to pay taxes on the gains. And so if you're willing to sort of let that money sit until you're older than 59 and a half years old, you absolutely should open a Roth IRA. And I'll just also say with the Roth, there is a maximum income limit to do a direct contribution. It's $140,000 for an individual, $210,000 for a couple. If you make more than that, that's when you would go with what John described as the backdoor Roth, where you put your money in traditional IRA and then immediately convert it to a Roth. And so I know I'm kind of getting into some weeds here. If anyone wants to talk more about that and have it explained in more detail, please reach out to me and we can talk about this at length.
Okay, so I think that's it for questions. And so we'll just conclude here. Thank you, Bradley, for taking the time to present on this topic and to answer all our questions. And the next talk in the series is Raising Money Savvy Children, Embracing Your Role as Chief Financial Parent, on Friday, February 12th at 12 p.m. noon. We hope to see you there. Also, next week, the library will be presenting a talk with doctors from St. Peter's University Hospital about sleep disorders on Friday, January 29th at 12 p.m. And the following week, there will be another talk with a doctor from St. Peter's, this time focusing on arthritis, on Friday, February 5th at 12 p.m. For more information on how, or to register, check the library's event page at ebpl.org/calendar. And thanks everyone for joining us for today's talk. So take care and stay safe.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Encore presentation. To join us for live programs or to learn more about the East Brunswick Public Library, visit our website at ebpl.org.